Hello, everyone. We'll get started. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. This webinar will be in English, and it will be recorded. We'll make the slides available afterwards to all the participants, and maybe the recording itself. It depends on the quality of the recording, of course. All right, so let me start by introducing myself. I'm Olivier Pichon. I'm the CTO of Zango. We help startups build their tech. So they don't have to worry about tech, they have to worry about the business only. That's what we do. All right, the topic today is, should you hire a CTO? And to be more brutal, you don't need a CTO. What you need is a product manager. So let's start by first, this is a real ad that I saw not too long ago, and I wonder if you can spot the problem. Now, obviously, it's the contradiction between the job description, CTO, senior dev, and the requirement of 2 years of experience. A senior dev generally requires at least 5 or 6 years of experience. Nobody serious will claim to be a senior dev without at least 5 years of experience. Here's a tip: if you're recruiting a developer, if the candidate claims to be a senior dev and he can only show 2 years of experience, then walk away. He's a fraud, or she's a fraud. Right? Now, I've seen, and there certainly exists some brilliant devs with 2 years of experience, in fact, some brilliant devs straight out of college, but they will not call themselves senior devs. They don't need the fake title to boost their credibility. Now, as a consequence, a CTO has got to be even more senior than a senior dev. And really, a CTO, you're talking about 10, 15 years of experience. If you want to push it, I would say a minimum of 8 years of experience. So, you know, again, I've seen CTOs who were less than 30, young CTOs, less than 30 years old, and they were very good CTOs. They were brilliant CTOs. So, you know, exceptions do exist, but in general, you want a CTO is somebody who has a minimum of 8 years of experience. Now, here are a few other mistakes I've seen. So typically, there are two co-founders. One went to business school, got an MBA, so he's a CEO. And the other is an engineer, or he's done a bit of coding when he was young. So, and he needs a C job, of course, so he's a CTO. There are cases where you have only a single dev, so he's any tech person you have. So by default, he's the CTO. Or there's a small team of 2 or 3 devs, and because because your startups, you don't have a big budget, so they're not very senior devs. So the least junior is by default again the CTO. Now all this doesn't make sense. All right, so you really have to avoid that if you can. And here's a third thing I've seen where the job is promised. If you're hired as a dev, and if you do well, then you'll become the CTO. Possibly this is done because, again, as a startup, you can't pay a lot of money. The salaries aren't very high. So this is done as a way to make the job slightly more attractive. So there's an upside potential for a promotion. But the reality is, and again, I'm talking general statements here, there are exceptions, but the likelihood that anybody in your current tech team will be your CTO, that's very low. It's not very unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen is this: when you raise your first seed round, let's say, to be conservative, $1 million. Seed rounds these days tend to be more than $1 million, but you can legitimately say, we're going to use that money to hire a CTO. Needless to say, a CTO with 8-10 years of experience, they're expensive, right? There's a chance your investors will make that suggestion to you. Now, your top dev may be very smart, he may be brilliant, maybe he built your product from the ground up, maybe he understands it inside out, but he will not have the credibility that your investors expect for a CTO. And they're going to say, look, are you joking? We've given you plenty of money. You have plenty of money. Go and hire the best CTO. Hire someone with 10, 15 years of experience. Hire someone who's already managed a team of 20 or 30 devs. Find someone who's already built a product that went to multi-million-dollar sales. Find somebody who's already been part of a startup that went through a Series A, and he knows what to say to investors during a Series A. Now, your top guy, however good he may be, it's unlikely that he or she will match all these criteria. So the reality is your current top dev should be thrilled at the prospect of working with such a high caliber CTO. It's a fantastic learning professional opportunity. He'll learn stuff, he'll gain a lot of experience, he should be thrilled. But if you've promised him the title, or worse, you've actually given him the job already, then you have to go back on your word, or you may have to demote the person. Now, however well-intentioned is that person, is still very hard. So best case, you may have to give him some compensation to sort of, sweeten the thing. Worst case, the person may leave and you lose a valuable asset. Or even worse, he'll stay, but he'll try and sabotage the new guy. And what is worst is that this is an entirely avoidable situation. This was created totally unnecessarily. And the solution is simple and cheap. It's free. Don't give the job. Don't promise the title. So let's take a look at what a CTO does, because there's still a job to be done. My position is that in an early stage startup, all the CTO is responsible for is to manage the technical debt. Now, I don't apologize for introducing jargon here. In fact, I think technical debt is one of the few items of IT jargon that any non-tech founder should know. So what is technical debt? Technical debt is the measure of the quality of your product under the hood, i.e. the code. And it tells you how easy it is to maintain it, to enhance it. So pretty much, if you find that anything you ask for, any bug fix, any feature takes ages, nothing gets done, or everything is very slow to get anything done, that's a sure sign that you've got a high technical debt. On the other hand, if everything is fast, you've hardly asked for something and it's done. Sometimes you ask for a new feature and the devs are actually suggesting maybe an enhanced version of that feature and saying, yeah, we can do that too. That's a sign that you have very low technical debt. So low technical debt is good, high technical debt is bad. You never have zero technical debt because it's a waste of time and resources to reach that. It's unrealistic. And there's too many things go too fast. You have to introduce some technical debt at some point anyway. But it's a matter of keeping it at a tolerable level where it doesn't, you don't slow down everything by trying to make everything perfect, but you don't try and just do things too fast and sloppily so that you end up having a high technical debt. I do want to point out one thing is that I do a webinar on MVP, and most of US startups will be focusing on building and launching your MVP, or you might be just after the launch of MVP, which is really technically the same. Technical debt is critical to the success of your MVP. It's perhaps the single most important factor to consider in the context of an MVP. Now, MVP, minimum viable product, the M is for minimal, which means you want to do the absolute least amount of work and get it out as soon as you can to validate your product on the market. That means you may leave some bugs in, you may not include some features. You have to remember the buyers of your MVP are early adopters. They are taking a risk. It might be a risk of spending money for something that won't work or they won't have a use for. It might be their time. It might be free, but they'll be wasting their time on it. If it's B2B, they might be taking a career risk by promoting your solution, which is unknown, by an unknown company, by unknown people. And if it doesn't work out, they may lose out on the bonus or the promotion that might go to their rival in the office next door. So they're taking a risk. They're looking for a solution to a big problem that they have. They don't really care about small bugs or some minor features that are missing. They essentially expect outstanding value that fixes a big problem of theirs. All right. So you can push the product out even if it's not perfect. In fact, you want to get it out as early as possible. But at the same time, as soon as it's out, you've got to keep enhancing it. You've got to keep adding features. You've got to keep fixing the bugs. Okay, so some people view MVP as a kind of throwaway product that is just cobbled together. That is not right. An MVP has to have a shelf life of 1 to 2 years. And therefore, the technology must allow it to be enhanced easily and bugs to be fixed easily. So there is a balance there to find. You've got to go fast, and sometimes you have to cut corners and increase technical debt, but you've got to keep your technical debt at a tolerable level so you don't jeopardize the success of your MVP after launch. And finally, it's called technical debt because you have to pay for it sooner or later with interest. So, it's not something that, cutting a corner, getting something done fast so you have it tomorrow, well, that sounds great, but you may end up having to spend a couple of weeks later to fix the code back and reduce the technical debt. So it is not neutral, it is actually very important. It's a very, very important responsibility of the CTO in an early stage startup, and I believe it's the only responsibility of the CTO in an early stage startup. Everything that he does can be subsumed under that particular heading. Now, how to manage technical debt? Now, there's a bunch of technical things, and these is what the CTO does. Okay, the first thing is to choose the appropriate technical stack, the established methodology, and the tools that the devs will use. Is to recruit and mentor developers, practice regular code reviews, and get involved in top-level design and architecture decisions. Now, you'll notice that some of these are one-time decisions. You're not going to choose a technical stack every week. You do that at the beginning, and that's it. Established dev methodology, that's a bit more fluid because part of it is top-down, where you say, the CTO says, look, that's the way it's going to be. That's not negotiable. But a lot of aspects are, you really want the team to actually participate. There's no cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all solution there. You want to have the way the team works is going to be suited to the team. And generally, there is some give and take, and the team's got to be allowed to participate in finding out what is the best way to work together. Okay, but again, this is not going to be put in question every day. Recruiting developers, again, that's not something that's going to happen every day. Mentoring, okay, possibly a bit more frequently, but devs should be fairly autonomous. They should not need a highly paid, high-level CTO sitting next to them all day long and every day of the week. It is also something that you can delegate to some members of your team, the slightly more senior members of the development team. That's something that a lot of them will appreciate. That's a way to make the job more attractive and not just be writing code, but actually grow into becoming potentially a team leader or learning what it takes to mentor other developers. Regular code reviews, again, that's something that you can delegate to some of the more senior members of the team. They will appreciate it. It's sometimes not every company gives them that opportunity. There are a lot of shops where developers come in, and every morning they see a list of the tickets that they have to work on that day. I mean, I would shoot myself if I had to work like this, but that happens. Okay, so sometimes it's just execution, it's just implementation. To give them the opportunity to do code reviews or review other people's code, that's valuable learning experience, and it's a way to make the job a lot more interesting. Similarly, top-level design architecture decisions, again, it depends on the seniority of the developers, but to give them an opportunity to participate not just in the implementation of the solution, but to actually come up with the solution themselves, that makes the job extremely attractive. Now, all this is to say that a lot of these practical things that the CTO should be doing don't really justify a full-time job, because either they're one-time decisions or they can be delegated to the team members themselves, and therefore you probably don't need a full-time CTO. The final aspect that I'm mentioning it here, but I'm going to go into this a lot more afterwards, is that the impact on the technical debt is also caused by non-technical factors. And I believe actually these non-technical factors are overwhelmingly critical to the technical debt, much more than the technical factors that we've just gone through. But let's before we get into that, let's move ahead a bit, okay? And again, let's look at the alternatives to full-time CTO. Again, the job of the CTO, which is to manage the technical debt, that's very important, and it's got to be done. I'm arguing that you don't necessarily need a full-time CTO to do that, because a full-time CTO is expensive, it's hard to find, and again, it's best not to give the title to someone who's not fully qualified to do it. First of all, the office hours. Now, I give office hours at a lot of incubators in Paris and Station F and others. Take advantage of it. It's free. Now, I mean, I do a lot of stuff during office hours. If at some point I feel you're taking advantage, I'll tell you. I'll say, sorry, that I can't do in the context of an office hour. But there are plenty of things that can be done, and it's free. Okay, I'm not, and there are other people who do technical office hours. They're obviously consultants. There are part-time CTO solutions where you hire a CTO for a day or two or more per month. Full disclosure, I provide part-time CTO services myself. Okay, now something that's coming out is known as CTO as a service solution, which is a way to make it slightly less expensive than part-time CTO, because part is automated or web-based, so therefore not as time-consuming as the full-time of a CTO. Okay, we are also working on a CTO as a service solution. As we've seen before, some of the responsibilities of the CTO can be delegated to the devs. This is really a win-win for everyone, because that's the opportunity for the devs to grow, to take on some extra responsibilities, possibly earlier than they would in another company. That makes the job more attractive to them. That makes them more generally more productive and more performant. Okay, so, and it means, again, that some stuff the CTO doesn't need to do all day long. Finally, outsourcing is also, if it's done well, a way as an alternative to full-time CTO. Now, there are many ways to do outsourcing. Some are bad, outright bad. Some are not a solution to CTO. For example, if you do, using body shops, which I certainly do not recommend, that will not solve the problem at all. If you outsource to an IT consulting firm, then generally what you get, you don't just get the devs, but you get a slice of their management's time, including their CTO. So you sort of get some part-time CTO as part of the package. All right. If you hire freelance, if you have a bunch of freelance guys, then it depends. If they're fairly junior freelancers, then that doesn't answer that's no solution to the problem. If they're experienced or senior freelance developers, and if the job can be segregated in sort of fairly well-defined silos, then they might, in their own area, be their own CTO, okay, or actually ensure that what you care about, which is technical debt, is taken care of properly. Right? So again, there are alternatives to having a full-time CTO. Now let's get on to what I think is very important, which is the non-technical factors that will impact the technical debt. And there are many of them. Now, first of all, and these are all examples that I've seen, that I've experienced, okay? There's the case where you're always trying to add features. And every day there's a new feature. And as you wake up every morning, you have a new idea, or you meet a potential customer or a potential partner, or all kinds of people give you advice, give you ideas, or they say, oh, if you did this, we'd buy your product. And therefore you come back to the office, say, oh, we've got to do this. When can we do that? The problem with that is devs don't have time. The dev team doesn't have time to first to think through every feature, so it's done, very fast, and also there's never any time to clean up the code. Software development is a constant struggle between doing things and doing things right, and we can always do things fast, but they will not be done right. Now, doing things right does not necessarily take a lot longer development time, but it certainly requires calendar time. So, for example, telling your dev team about a feature that you are considering maybe for 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the road, so you don't need it now, but you're thinking about it, that gives your dev team the time to think about it, to think how would be the best way to implement it without any rush, without any urgency. Sometimes just to have an extra day to think through a solution would help avoid a lot of mistakes. Now, if you come up with a request for a feature and it's urgent, it's going to be done right away, then most devs they want to help, so they'll do it. And unfortunately, because they're under pressure, they don't have there's time pressure. They'll come up with a solution which is not necessarily the good one. And sometimes, again, just one day, just the opportunity to sleep on it for one night, the next morning we could come up with a much better solution. We don't have that time, so we go for the first solution, not perfect, very suboptimal. And ideally, you have your demo. After that, we normally take some time to clean up that bad code and do it right. But unfortunately, there's already another urgent feature coming up, so we don't have time to clean up. We have to work again in a rush for the next urgent feature. And so the bad code is still there. And when we need to add features, we have to add bad code on top of bad code. And therefore, that's how technical debt starts to pile up. Now, there's all kinds of, there's confusing, inconsistent specs. So the devs are not quite sure what you mean. It's hard to interpret. There's some use cases that haven't been mentioned. So what should happen in that case? You are not available to clarify, to answer the dev's question. So, well, they try and second guess you. They try and take some initiative to see what makes the most sense. Or sometimes they don't even understand exactly what, or they misunderstand what you want. Then things are not tested, or you take it the day before the demo, and of course that's when you realize, oh, that's not at all what I want. So things have got to be fixed, in a rush at the last minute. And of course it's bad code, and the vicious cycle starts again. Always last minute requirements. I have actually, sometimes it's just because founders are under pressure themselves, that they're overworked, as it happens all the time in startups. They they're subject to such a constant pressure of requirements, demands from everybody around them. They don't have time to anticipate and sit down and write their requirements, in advance. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen, some people seem to believe that the way to manage a development team is to tell them what they want at the last minute, just before they need it. It's hard to believe, but that happens. This is, of course, a terrible way to run a development team, because again, the development team works better if they have time, calendar time, to think about a feature before they have to implement it. Time to discuss the requirements, time to identify, wait a second, what happens in this case? What if the user does this? That's not specified in the requirements, but it's important. Okay, time to go back to you and get clarifications from you. In time, giving you enough time to get back to them. Okay. Another thing I see is, priorities get switched. So every day there's something new that's urgent, or drop what you were doing and do this now. This is urgent now. Okay. And the next day is something else. And everything's urgent. Now, developers need to concentrate, and switching context is extremely costly in terms of productivity. And they switch to do your priority, then trying to go back to what they were doing before. They have to get back in that context. Something gets lost. Everything's urgent. That's another thing. Now, devs pretty much get wary of this, because they feel, well, everything is urgent. Nothing can be urgent all the time. So, and also I've seen this, something is urgent, and then it is done urgently, and then the feature just sits there on the staging server, unchecked, untested for days or weeks. Now, you can do that once, but the next time you ask for something urgent, the devs will say, well, sure, we've heard that before. As I've mentioned also, not giving the techs the time to clean up the code. I recommend that every 4 weeks or every 5 weeks, you take 1 week where the devs just do housekeeping. No new features, just housekeeping. Bring down the technical debt. Okay? And if they never have time to do that, and there's always a good reason to say, sorry, right now we have to add features, because until we have customers, we just have to, we'll clean up the code when we have customers, which is a terrible decision to make. Okay. Another thing is, and that happens when the developers are sitting next to you, is constantly interrupt. You have an idea, oh, hey, is this possible? Can you do that? Could we do that? Now, devs will answer, but devs need to concentrate. So even when they look like they're not doing anything, like they're not actually typing on their keyboard, they're actually thinking. You don't want to interrupt them. If you have ideas or questions, you write them down, or there are plenty of tools so you can record these questions so they're not lost, and you ask them at the next weekly meeting. Or that system means the devs can see it, they can answer them when they have time. Okay? Now, there's more. the passing your stress to the dev team. Now, there's a lot of stress that you get as a startup founder. Stress is the enemy of developers. Developers need time to think things through. Urgency, which is a form of stress, is also the enemy of developers. Developers need to actually calendar time to think things ahead, to make sure they have the right solution. And again, sometimes this has no impact on the timeline of deliverables. We talk about calendar time, so essentially we're talking about you telling the devs about what you want ahead of time, ahead of when you actually need it. Now, stress is normally related to deadlines. Now, this is something that is the hardest thing I find for non-tech people to wrap their minds about, and it will be the topic of my next webinar. You cannot manage software development with deadlines. Now, I know you in the business side, you have deadlines, you have hard deadlines. Okay, you have booked a booth at a trade show. You have set a date for your launch. You've booked some, advertising for the launch. You've got a meeting with a very, very hard to book senior guy at a strategic partner client, a prospect, or at an investor's. All right, that meeting cannot be rescheduled. It took you long enough to get it. You can't call the guy and say, "Oh, sorry, it will be a day. Can we do it next day?" The next day, not possible. Okay, these are hard deadlines, but these belong to the business side. Now, stress comes because you have constraints and you have the feeling you have no control over them. And the natural way to deal with stress is to try and pass it on to somebody else. And generally, that's the dev team. Right? Guys, we have a deadline. We've got to get it done. This is terrible because developers can't deal with deadlines themselves. So you're creating stress because you're setting constraints that they have no way to deal with. All right. Now, this happens in many ways. I've seen people say, "Look, guys, this is very easy. This should be done in a day, so I want it today." Now, if you're not like a tech person, you have no credibility. You're in fact attacking that expertise by claiming you know how long something takes. So that's actually a deep insult to experts. And secondly, the truth is, if it cannot be done, it cannot be done in a day. No amount of shouting in your side and will change that. If it cannot be done, it cannot be done. And it cannot be done sometimes because of all kinds of factors. There might be a particular difficulty. It might be the existing technical debt. It might be the fact that you have other urgent requests at the same time. So, which one is he going to do first? There's sometimes the more insidious ways of setting deadlines. You say, "Look, I don't want to set deadlines for you. You tell me how long it's going to take. You tell me when you think this can be done." And the devs, what they want to say is, "I don't know. I have no clue. I think maybe a week, but frankly, we'll see when we get there." But no, look, I've got an appointment made. I've got to make an appointment. I've got to book with a meeting with this guy. I need to tell you. If you need 3 weeks, tell me you need 3 weeks. And if you push the dev, he will give you a deadline just to get you off his back. Now, if you actually believe that you'll get that feature on the deadline, then you're a fool. Because there are plenty of very good reasons, which are not the dev's fault, why it would not happen. And again, you can't manage software development with deadlines. So I know it's hard to understand, but you have to believe me on this. And please come to my next webinar on this to learn more about it. But you simply can't. You're just creating stress on the dev team, and stress means bad code, and therefore technical debt. Now, second guessing your dev team. Okay, I see people sometimes. I had a customer for 15 years, and every time he asked me something, he would say, "Look, Olivier, this will take you. It's very simple. This will take you 10 minutes." All right, and I've been more than 20 years in this business. I know what I'm worth. I mean, I know how good I am. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. And yet every time I felt, "Look, you don't know anything about it. How do you know how long it takes? How do you know it takes 10 minutes? I know nothing can be done in 10 minutes. And most of the time, frankly, I can't even know how long something takes. I'm wrong 50% of the time. So how can you know better than I do?" Okay. Of course, denigrating your dev team. This happens a lot. The thing is, when things go sour, it goes sour very fast. Okay, and then you do all these things like piling pressure on the dev team with badly formulated requests or requirements, interrupting them constantly, and then you end up with high technical debt. You end up, everything slows to a crawl. The smallest thing takes ages to get done. So now it's your team's fault. They're not good enough. Now, the reality is your dev team is a given. Now, there's a myth that's propagated by Hollywood, movies where every developer is some kind of genius, some kind of autistic genius, and these guys will produce your fantastic app in a weekend. That's not real life. Like any profession, the distribution of skills follows a bell curve. You have a few geniuses, you have a good number of people who are very good, you have an equal number of people who are duds, and the rest is sort of spread around the average. right? And then most of the people are around the average. Now, if a guy's not good enough, is really really incompetent, you should get rid of him. But if you decide that he's good enough to be on your team, that's it. Now, clearly, if you compare two teams and one team, your team is slightly less competent than every member of another team, that other teams, sure, they'll do better stuff, they'll move faster. But you can't replace your team with that team. That's not an option. What you might, if it was actually possible in practice, what you would gain in increased competence, you would lose because this new team doesn't know your product or your business. Okay, so your team pretty much is a given. Also, you don't want to do, even if you don't want to change your team or to even change one member of your team just before the launch of your MVP. That's really not the time to do it. So you have to consider that your team with its skill level, that's a given. There's not much you can do about it. All these other factors that we've seen here, this is something you have control over. If you have a question to the devs, well, don't pick up the phone or don't write the message in Slack. Wait, write it somewhere else and ask it later. Okay? Is what you want really urgent? You've got other priorities. Do you really want to move this item to the top of the line? What is the impact on the other priorities that you said before? Okay? Are you willing to accept that what was number one is now number two, therefore will be delayed? So these are things that you have control over, and these are things that you actually have to work on. These are non-technical factors, and again, things can go south very fast. And in fact, and forgive my French, but there are many ways for the non-tech people to fuck up the technical team and ramp up technical debt. And I believe that these non-technical factors actually are far more important and critical than the pure technical factors in managing technical debt. And that's where the product manager comes in. Okay, now the product manager, his job is, there's several things he has to do. First, he's got to make sure that the functional requirements are properly thought through. Okay, all the potential edge cases have been identified and designed. If there are inconsistencies or ambiguities in the specs, then he's there to clarify them and provide clarity to the devs, possibly by going back to the stakeholders to say, look, what did you mean by that? The product manager also must sanctuarize the current development cycle. Now, we recommend very short development cycles, like a week, 2 weeks at most. And we do that so that you can change priorities next week. Okay? It's short enough that if you want to change priorities, it's okay. But within the development cycle, you do not change the priorities. Or you can, but it's got to be exceptional. The product manager is also there to make sure that whatever is done is tested continuously and that feedback is obtained and given to the dev team. And that means sometimes, well, testing himself, identifying users who can do the test and provide good feedback. Sometimes it means pushing the founders to make sure, look, you have to look at this. You have to tell us whether that's what you want. Your demo is, a week from now. We need to know if we've got it right. His job is also to explain the product vision to the dev team. Again, the dev team will work better if they know what they're working for, what the product does, how it helps users. Importantly, the product manager is there to give calendar time to the dev team so they can anticipate upcoming features. Again, it's important and useful to let the devs know this is not to be done today, but a few weeks from now, that's what we want to do. And that helps them make better decisions, possibly even what they're doing today. That feature may benefit from it. In a sense, the product manager is like a project manager plus plus. It's more than a project manager. He's got to understand the vision of the product. He's got to be the liaison between the stakeholders and the dev team, possibly sometimes a shield, i.e. there are cases where we have to say, look, you do not, to the stakeholders or the founders, do not speak to the devs directly. if you have questions, go through the product manager. He must sometimes be able to say no to stakeholders, or the founders actually, meaning, guys, no, you set the priority for this week, and we have to stick to it. What you want to change, now you want to have something urgent, well, last week also was something urgent. So is this really urgent, or can it wait for next week? We can handle it the next cycle, no problem. But this week, we have to finish what we started. Now, generally, most founders take on that job themselves because, of course, they're the ones who have the best vision of the product. It's actually, I believe, it's very hard for the founders to do that, because the psychological profile you need to be a product manager is very different from the psychological profile of an entrepreneur. As a founder, you've got to wake up every morning with plenty of ideas of how your product could actually be good for, this new market segment, this new target. How you could add this feature to make it to be able to go after this other group of users. That if you don't have that every morning, then either you're burnt out or possibly you're not a true entrepreneur. But when it comes to managing your MVP, once you walk into the office, you've got to forget all this and you have to say no. You have to say no to yourself. You have to say no to your partners, to your staff, to your customers, your advisors, your investors. You have to say, thank you very much. It's a great idea. We'll keep it in mind. And then you do absolutely nothing about it. Okay, and you keep focused on your MVP. And again, the MVP, you have a very, very limited set of features that you want to do. And so that you launch your MVP as soon as possible, and you don't want to deviate from that. So it's a very different mindset. And sometimes founders are simply unsuited to it. There are exceptions. I've known people who are very good at it, and they're the founders of their startup, but it's quite rare. Okay, so sometimes it's best to hire a product manager. And pretty much my conclusion is, if you have a full-time hire, a full-time product manager is a better choice than a full-time CTO. I forgot to mention, but all these responsibilities I described for a product manager, this is full-time. This is extremely time-consuming. Of course, the larger your development team, the more time is required from the product manager. But if you have 3 or 4 devs, you probably need a product manager full-time. 1 or 2 devs, maybe you can as a founder, maybe you can manage it yourself if you have the right skill set. But beyond that, you probably need a product manager full-time. And whereas a CTO, I believe there are alternatives to full-time CTO. Frankly, I don't think there are realistic alternatives for a full-time product manager. A product manager, because he's got to know he's got to share the vision, it's hard to outsource. It's harder to outsource than outsourcing the CTO function. So that's the takeaway from this webinar. To succeed in launching your MVP, a full-time product manager is, to me, far more critical than a full-time CTO. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for attending. You can, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Otherwise, you're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, and send me a message. If you have questions, send me a message. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. If you are one of the participating incubators, please book an office hour. Here's the link. If your incubator does not have office hours with me, then speak to the manager and get him in touch, and I'll be happy to offer office hours through your incubator.